In this presentation, I'm going to talk about democratic schools, which are a very special kind of schools, and my reflection is based partially on my own research in democratic schools in Spain, mainly Madrid, but also is based on this book you can see on the left side. The book is Democratic Schools, who is a book that is a book compiled by James Bean and Michael Bean, and it's a book in which these authors explain, describe what is a democratic school, and also it contains several articles, several chapters written by teachers and headmasters of different democratic schools. The book has been translated into many languages, between them Spanish, and it was a complete success in the sense that I think, or if I remember correctly, more than 1 million copies were sold of this book. The most important feature of these schools are the idea of schools academic success for everyone through classroom democracy. So the main features of these schools are as follows. First of all, the question of project-based learning, the idea of curriculum globalization. Secondly, the promotion of dialogue. In the third place, the idea of promoting the use of library, or better said, libraries in plural. And in the fourth position, you see the question of classroom layout, how to distribute the desks, the spaces in the classroom. In the fifth place, the question of opening up to the vicinity, to the environment, open the school to the neighborhood, to the village in which the school is located. And finally, the question of democratic coexistence, the question of resolving problems, living together, and so on, through democratic media.
¿Cuál es la descripción del tejado, Cristina?
Pues es la pizarra, es un color opaco, azulado y oscuro, y se divide fácilmente en lajas y en hojas planas.
$1.100 alumnos de 37 nacionalidades, de 8 religiones, con unos contextos también en tema de capacidades, de etnias, complicado, diverso, pues es difícil de atender a todos y cada uno con una escuela inclusiva si no se hace algo diferente. Nosotros a finales del siglo pasado no estábamos a gusto con el colegio que teníamos y con el resultado que teníamos.
Cuerpos geométricos, ¿vale? Esto es un cuerpo geométrico.
Esa era la gran pregunta de entonces, ¿no? ¿A quién le doy clase hoy? ¿Le doy clase a los que hacen las tareas, a los que vienen a clase habitualmente, a los que me atienden? Entonces empezamos a imaginar, a soñar y a crear en el año 2003 un proyecto que se llama Aulas Cooperativas Multitarea, en el que se encuentran todos los niños de educación secundaria de este colegio. Empezamos a globalizar el aprendizaje, fundamentalmente en dos ámbitos: el sociolingüístico, que trabaja con la lengua, las sociales y el inglés, y el científico-tecnológico, que trabaja con las ciencias, la tecnología y las matemáticas. Nos permitía ya, al trabajar con ámbitos, meter la figura de un tercer profesor en el aula. Por supuesto, decidimos ya trabajar sin libros de texto en el año 2003, trabajar todo con materiales digitales.
Eso es lo que quiero que hagáis en casa, ¿vale?
Ahora mismo nos encontramos en el ámbito científico-tecnológico, que recoge las 3 asignaturas de ciencias, biología y geología en primero de la ESO, matemáticas y tecnología y robótica, y están 3 profesores en el aula. Para eso, para fomentar distintas actividades y poder supervisar los distintos ritmos de aprendizaje.
Los tejados se hacen de muchos materiales tecnológicos, pero para que hagáis una investigación, el que vais a investigar es uno que habéis estado viendo en rocas y minerales. ¿Qué elemento creéis que es? La pizarra. Estamos realizando un proyecto de matemáticas y tecnología donde estamos relacionando la geometría al mundo de la tecnología. Está todo ambientado en que queremos construir el polideportivo del colegio. Entonces, Mediante preguntas de geometría, los chicos van haciendo investigaciones en grupo de cuáles son las respuestas a esas preguntas, y si todo el grupo es capaz de adivinarlo, consiguen una pieza del polideportivo. ¿Qué es lo que estamos haciendo de esa manera? Hacer un repaso sobre todos los materiales tecnológicos que se suelen utilizar en el mundo de la tecnología para que ellos luego lo sepan aprovechar en proyectos que puedan hacer en cursos posteriores. Y así de esa manera vemos la interdisciplinaridad que hay entre las matemáticas y la tecnología.
Entendemos que no todos los chicos aprenden de la misma manera, en el mismo ritmo y de la misma forma, ¿no? Y entonces potenciamos distintas actividades para poder abarcar el máximo número de alumnos, que cada uno encuentre su manera de trabajar y de poder estudiar.
Muchos de los contenidos que se dan a lo largo de la etapa escolar de los chicos son repetitivos. Si lo que hacemos es motivar el autoaprendizaje, el recuerdo, de esa manera ellos son protagonistas de recordar todo lo que ya han aprendido en primaria y no se tienen que aburrir con una clase explicatoria nuestra, que muchas veces lo que hacemos es perder el tiempo.
Vértices, vértices, vértices. Lo que forman dos lados cuando se cruzan.
El objetivo fundamental es el aprendizaje del castellano. Es un poco la norma por la que se rigen, es que un alumno, diríamos, está aquí hasta que aprende tiene la suficiente competencia lingüística para poderse incorporar a una aula ordinaria. Es decir, que todos estos chavales que están aquí ahora son de distintas edades, entre 12 y 17 años, por lo tanto tienen un curso asignado, o primero, segundo, tercero o cuarto, y mientras aquí lo que están aprendiendo es la lengua, ¿no? En este momento hay 5 o 6 nacionalidades, concretamente hay niños y niñas de Bangladesh, de la India, de Filipinas, de Rumanía, de China, y luego algunos ya que han acabado su escolarización en estas aulas ya se han ido incorporando, ¿no?
Cuando esto surge, que surge en 2003-2004, nos encontramos, es verdad, familias que nos comentaban que su hijo iba muy bien y entonces que el tema de trabajar en equipo pues que les podía perjudicar, porque es verdad que ralentiza el trabajo, que bueno, pues que al ir más despacio porque tienes que ayudar al otro a que siga adelante, pues puede perjudicarles, ¿no? Y entonces tenían mucho miedo. Pero yo la pregunta que les hago siempre a estas familias es qué tipo de educación quieren para sus hijos, o sea, qué capacidades quieren desarrollar en ellos. Si es exclusivamente conceptual, exclusivamente curricular, pues este a lo mejor no es el colegio, aunque es verdad que alcanzamos índices muy altos a nivel académico, pero no es nuestro objetivo.
Well, you have watched a video in which some features of this kind of schools are explained. So let's go point by point with the features I've mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. First of all, the question of projects and globalization, this idea of breaking the barriers between different subjects in the curriculum, and instead of that working through projects usually proposed by the pupils themselves. So the idea is, well, this is technically called center of interest. Center of interest is a topic that has been selected by the students themselves, and they worked about this center of interest throughout a quarter or trimester. Here you're going to see some examples in the presentation. As you can see, this is an example taken from an elementary school, third grade in elementary school, in which the two groups of the third grade during a trimester works with the same topic. This is a research about cinema, and in the center of the slide you see the main question: what do we know about cinema? And so the teacher is taking notes of the ideas that the students bring up. First of all, the question of open-air cinema, the idea that not always cinema is being watched inside closed theaters, but on the so-called drive-in cinemas. Cinema by hand, it means that in previous times, several decades ago, in order to project a movie, we need to roll a crank. The question of advertising. How do people know about the release of a movie? How this movie is advertised in the media, in the journals, in television, in the radio, and so on. Next question. Lumiere brothers. Were Lumiere brothers the persons who invented the cinema? The question of silent movies compared with talkies, with talking movies. The question of cinema city. Several cities around the world have the so-called cinema city. Probably the most well-known is the Città Cinema in Rome, but also we have La Ciudad del Cine in the case of Madrid, obviously Hollywood. And then the question of black and white films. Once again, we are in the field of the history of education, and the students or the pupils talk about why in previous times most of the movies were only black and white.
On March 24th, you're going to stand in front of your peers, you're going to stand in front of your parents, you're going to stand in front of a panel of engineers. You will have data, you will have graphs, and you're going to knock the socks off people. From now,
Seattle teacher Scott McComb is outlining a project to his 9th grade physics class that will have them creating, building, and testing various wing structures that they will design in teams. McComb is part of a growing group of educators who believe project learning is the most effective way to teach.
I'll try right now so you know how to do it.
When you think about project-based learning, learning that results in demonstrations of performance, real tasks that have brought challenges to students to solve, you can see that it's in context with the ways in which kids have to be able to be functioning adults.
It's quite an improvement for us. Remember our first wing didn't even hold water.
Project learning is a hands-on, student-directed activity in which students create something that demonstrates what they have learned, whether it's a website, a play.
Can you believe this arrogance? They think they can stop us. Nothing can stop us.
Or a wing design portfolio.
First thing you have to do is to give up the idea of curriculum. Curriculum meaning you have to learn this on a given day. Replace it by a system where you learn this where you need it. So that means you're going to put kids in a position where they're going to use the knowledge that they get.
Projects involve in-depth investigations of subject matter which are often guided by professional experts who enrich and supplement the teacher's knowledge.
We do this in the real world too, and it's very cool. And I'm hoping to show you how cool it is.
I like doing hands-on projects more, just because I feel I learn better by learning from my own experiences. When we were doing the wing project, I learned, like, our first wing was really bad, and then our third wing, we did really well.
Oh, I'm so proud of us.
Current research shows that project learning can be more effective than traditional instruction in increasing academic achievement. It is also effective in helping students understand, apply, and retain information. Other benefits include building skills like critical thinking, communication, and collaboration. Students who work on projects show increased motivation and engagement in their studies.
Our task was to create a high-efficiency, low-weight wing that, when tested, it would show the values you'd want for a real wing.
These kids, the way they present themselves, they're articulate, they know what they're about, they know what they've learned, they've obviously been able to work together. And in a situation like this, for 9th graders to pull off something like that is absolutely remarkable.
And here's our data for our wings. This would be the first round, would be 1, 2, and 3, then 4, 5, and 6.
For more information about what works in public education, go to edutopia.org.
Well, you have just watched an example, one explanation more than an example, more than an example of the way in which project-based is organized. Now let's go to the second feature, which is the question of dialogue. Once again, dialogue starts from what students know. In the case of the primary schools or elementary schools I visited, there was quite common to have, before beginning the official teaching time, the first thing they do in the morning was the so-called assemblies, although I prefer the old Greek term of agora. In these assemblies, the students, as you can see in the snapshot, gather or form a group, form a kind of a square in which they present something of interest for the rest of the classroom. For they present news that can be taken from journals, from dailies, from the television. They have some discussion about different topics. This is also an opportunity for solving conflicts inside this specific classroom. And the most important idea is to verbalize what the students consider important to convey, to communicate to the classmates. And it's quite typical in these assemblies to congratulate your classmates. For instance, some people say, okay, well, at the beginning of the course you were very shy, but with the passing of time you have been able to gain confidence, to communicate in a more effective way. The problem for secondary schools is that they don't usually have this kind of assemblies. Instead of that, they have the tutor class. But tutor class usually is no other thing but a time to study or to communicate several things. The role of the tutor in secondary education is to act as a kind of middleman between the students of the group of which the tutor is in charge and the rest of the staff, the rest of the teachers. The third question relates to the question of libraries. Libraries exemplify the passion for knowledge, the idea that as long as you read books, you're able to reach almost any kind of knowledge. Let's say that the use of libraries is much more intensive in primary schools. In fact, some of the schools I have visited don't resort to textbooks. Instead, they have a lot of books. In fact, they have a library in every classroom. They have a very big library in the school itself, and also they have they resort to neighborhood libraries, for instance, municipal libraries. Regrettably, this is not the case for secondary education. In fact, sometimes the libraries in secondary education are used as a place in which to place or to send those students that are punished because of bad behavior. So what idea can have a student that perceives the library as a place in which somebody or their classmates or the mates are simply punished? Sometimes we have some experiences worthwhile to mention. For instance, the so-called dialogic readings, in which the students, the teacher, and some adults, for instance, maybe mothers more than fathers, gather in order to talk about, for instance, a short novel or something. And so they have the possibility of intergenerational reading. Here you have a very short explanation about what to understand by reading competency. Reading competency, as you can see there, is going beyond decodifying written text. This is not enough to have access to complex knowledge. I will say that libraries are very important places in order to have access to knowledge that can bring you different points of view about a specific subject, and this allows to be able to read complex and long text. And here you have some bad data about the use of libraries in the case of secondary education. This data comes from very, well, not exactly very, but an old research published in 2005, in which you can see that 75% of secondary education teachers say that they do not visit the library with their students. More than 60% never recommend any reading at all to their students. And if so, it's mainly about reading classical literature, never or almost never history, economy, sciences, biology, physics, and so on. A paradigm change will be needed if we want the library to take center stage. So I think we must reflect on this idea of reading only or mainly classical literature and never reading about many different topics that you talk about in your school experience. And now let's go to another topic, the question of different classrooms arrangements. Let's say that in the primary classroom it's much more likely to be innovative in how to distribute, on how to configure the distribution of chairs, what to put on the walls and so on in the case of primary classrooms. So primary classrooms in the schools I have visited are a setting for creative and serious work. But the contrary, or more or less the opposite, is what has happened in secondary classroom, in which there is an ornamental frugality. You don't realize what kind of people, what kind of activities are being made in the classrooms in secondary education schools. Here you have two snapshots. The first one is taken from one of the schools you have watched in the first video, the Padre Piquer school, a charter school in Madrid. As you can see, this is a very big classroom, and it's a very big classroom because they have knocked down the walls that separated two different classrooms. So maybe in this classroom you have around 50 students, but at the same time you have 2 or 3 teachers, and you can see they are working by groups. In the other snapshot, you see that the typical brick wall has disappeared, and instead of that you have a crystal wall. In the next slide you have an example taken from a high school in Madrid. Now you are going to watch 3 videos in a row. In the first of these videos you are going to see, or you are going to watch an explanation of why to resort to different classrooms arrangements. In the second one, you are going to have an explanation of the interactive groups, an activity that is allowed when you have this position of the classroom, like the one you have watched in this snapshot. And in the third place, you are going to see a video about peer tutoring.
Hello and welcome to Teachings in Education, Classroom Seating Arrangement Styles. Numerous seating arrangement styles are available to educators. The first style arrangement is called the traditional. You'll see this arrangement from kindergarten all the way up to college level classes. The teacher's desk is located in the front of the room. The desks are arranged in simple rows and columns, and students are facing the teacher and the whiteboard. The teachers move up and down the rows of the desks. Students are able to work independently, as this arrangement isn't suited for group work. Use this arrangement when giving your students exams and other types of assessments. Teachers are able to keep an eye on all students. Teachers mostly use direct instruction, which can lead to student boredom if used too often. So to summarize, it's good for staying on task, great for giving exams. Teachers easily supervise students, but it is not student-centered, and that can lead to less paying attention. Next up is the horseshoe arrangement. Students are arranged in a U shape, hence the name, and facing toward one another. The teacher can stand in the middle of the room and become the main point of attention. Teachers can sort of bounce around the room to get to any student. The arrangement is much more suited for discussions as opposed to the traditional model. The open space is a place for presenters to take center stage and engage with the audience. The open space and use it for activities and to get students moving. Students can easily share materials with one another and help each other out. On the other hand, this often leads to students copying one another's work. The horseshoe arrangement is good for discussion forums. Students can take center stage. Teachers can easily get to the students The space can be used for kinesthetic activities, but students often copy each other's work. Now let's move on to the third seating arrangement, which is small grouping. This is sometimes called group pods. Here, the teacher's desk is usually located in front of the room. The student desks are situated in groups of 4, although other variations are possible. The teacher can move about freely and facilitate group learning that's usually taking place. Small groups allow for cooperative learning, and students can discuss project plans, and they can work together as a functioning unit to develop teamwork skills. As the students are working on their projects, the teacher can walk around the room and facilitate learning. Some downsides include the room getting a little too noisy. And with group work, there's usually one person in the group that doesn't put their share of effort. So to summarize, the small group arrangement is great to build teamwork, student discussions, and doing projects, but it can get loud and not all students will contribute equally. The next classroom arrangement style is the runway. The teacher's desk is usually in a corner, students facing one another. This creates a large space in the middle of the room. Teachers will stand in the middle and bounce back and forth from student to student. The runway is most often used when teachers are setting up a classroom debate. Each side of the runway will have their own argument. Other times, teachers can use the open space to perform demonstrations for students. This arrangement does lead to students shouting across the room. So to summarize here, the runway is great for political debates. Students can bounce ideas off one another. However, it does get loud, and students on the ends of the rows often feel isolated. The next arrangement style is called paired groupings, although many other names exist, such as paired pods. The teacher's desk is located in the corner or front of the room. The desks are arranged in groups of 2, and they're facing the front of the classroom. Now, when it comes to assigning student pairs, there are different ways teachers can go. A teacher's movement isn't as hindered as the traditional arrangement, but not as free as a small group arrangement. Peer tutoring is the most obvious reason to utilize this seating style. Be sure each student understands their role and responsibilities. Other reasons for the set is the famous think, pair, share. Some schools use this arrangement for lab partners if the school lacks lab tables. So to summarize, it's great for peer tutoring where gifted students can pair with struggling students, works well for lab partners if tables aren't available, and it does create some space. Now we move on to our last classroom arrangement style, the round table. The desks form a circle with an open space in the middle. The desks are facing each other to increase face-to-face interaction. One way to make use of the round table is for ice-breaking activities. As a teacher, you may want to introduce yourself to the class and then have the class introduce themselves. The best thing about the round table is that all students feel like they are part of the group. So to summarize, it's best for creating inclusivity among students, facilitating communication of classroom discussions, and having introduction of members. However, it is limited to discussion activities, and shy students often feel exposed. Please subscribe to this channel, and don't forget to like and share this video.
Yo le doy al tiempo y a todo, ¿vale? Así que...
Los grupos interactivos son la forma de organizar el aula que da los mejores resultados en la actualidad en cuanto a la mejora del aprendizaje y la convivencia. A través de los grupos interactivos se multiplican y diversifican las interacciones a la vez que se aumenta el tiempo de trabajo efectivo. Prepara actividades cortas. Las actividades son rotativas, así que cada grupo debería pasar por cada actividad. Informa con al menos una semana de antelación a la coordinación de los grupos interactivos del día y la hora de la actividad y solicita tantos voluntarios como grupos tengas. Distribuye al alumnado en grupos heterogéneos.
Por ahí. Vosotros esperáis, ¿no?
Coloca al voluntariado en las mesas correspondientes.
Buenos días.
explica al alumnado y al voluntariado cómo se organiza la actividad y cuál es el objetivo de esta.
Como ya sabéis, cada 10 minutos terminará la...
Recuerda al voluntariado que están ahí para dinamizar y promover las interacciones entre el alumnado y que la actividad se resuelva con éxito, no para resolver dudas. Además, el voluntariado anotará sus observaciones en las parrillas de evaluación durante la realización de la actividad. Cuando finalice una actividad, recoge un documento de solo un miembro del grupo, al azar, que te servirá de evaluación para todo el grupo. Recoge la parrilla de evaluación realizada por el voluntariado. Cierra la sesión con una puesta en común. Voluntariado y alumnado ofrecen valoraciones y aportaciones de lo sucedido en la actividad.
So if the people aren't voting or the people aren't being involved, what happens?
It's the last period of the day at Eastern High School in Washington, D.C. Like many other teens, 12th grader Rico McCart has many things to do after school. But unlike most of his classmates, one of those things is walking to the nearby elementary school to tutor 2nd and 3rd graders in reading and writing. And he's paid for this assignment.
You found it?
Rico is one of around 6 dozen high school students participating in a literacy program run by Reach Incorporated, a nonprofit that aims to develop confident readers and capable leaders.
Oh, yeah, I got it.
The teens selected to become tutors are usually struggling in school.
We believe that giving teenagers real responsibility allows them to create change in their community and to actually better themselves.
The program began in 2010. Since then, more than 500 high school and elementary school students have taken part. For the teens, the results so far are obvious and positive.
How you spell ball?
B-A-L-L. We actually have a test that tests their reading level at the beginning of the year, in the middle of the year, at the end of the year. And most of our tutors grow about 2 grade levels per year.
I was definitely struggling, at least like 3 or 4 classes.
Now Rico's grades have improved and he's more confident.
I was kind of shy my first day here at Reach. I didn't really say much. I didn't say much for 2 weeks actually. I was like by myself in a corner. You know, everybody would look at me and I just like put my head up like this. What else could we find?
Now he knows how to engage young students, how to be a good tutor.
You gotta have confidence. You have to have enthusiasm. You have to show grit. You gotta show toughness. And you have to show energy.
Teacher Judith Miller says her students benefit a lot from this program.
They get to see what it is to be with high school students and how the high school students interact with them. When the students give it to them, it's a little different because it's fun. The students are not as direct, you know, with them as if like they're a classroom teacher. So they get to do the same standards but in a different way.
Which one are you trying to find?
Over the 4 years he's been tutoring, Rico was promoted twice, which means his pay has increased.
For me, it's not about the money. I'm definitely here just for the kids. You found train, man. That's what I'm talking about. To be honest with you, I come here every single day working with the kids, you know, making sure that they're happy. I just basically do my best as what I can do as a person.
Oh, I found it. It's right here.
The REACH program is making a difference for the tutors and the kids they help. For writer Faiza El Masri, I'm Faith Lapidus, VOA News.
Well, if you remember our first lesson about the school in the knowledge society, one of the features I mentioned was the idea that you have knowledge almost everywhere in this society. So this is why it's so important, this fifth feature of the democratic schools, which is the openness to the environment, because there are a very huge educational reach in surrounding any school, irrespective of whether this school is located in a big city or in the countryside. Think, for instance, in the success of the Vernier exhibition at Amsterdam. The tickets were sold in a question of a very, very few minutes. It's more or less the same situation like the selling of tickets for a rock concert, for a Coldplay concert, for instance. And we also have the possibility of resorting to significant people or institutions. I remember visiting a school that was located near a senior citizen center, in which the senior citizens would volunteer in order to attend the school for explaining the kind of games they used to play when they were the age of the kids in the school they are visiting. And finally, we have the so-called service learning, which is explained by one of the main protagonists of service learning in Spain. So it's a worthwhile video.
La educación tenemos el reto de que todo el mundo aprenda y aprenda lo máximo posible. Y que además, cuando salga de ahí, siga con ganas de aprender. El aprendizaje servicio lo que nos plantea es vamos a trabajar todos juntos en proyectos, en equipo, en grupos heterogéneos y vamos a trabajar de manera que unos van a tirar de otros y vamos a poder conseguir que más niños se incorporen. Pero es que además un elemento que hace que más niños se incorporen no solo es ese trabajo en equipo, sino que van a comprender mucho mejor para qué estudian, para qué están trabajando en la clase lo que están abordando. Tenemos a pedagogos de finales del 19, como John Dewey, que dice la gente aprende a través de la acción. Los niños y las niñas aprenden actuando. O en el otro extremo del planeta, la escuela rusa, que dicen Makarenko, se aprende a través de la experiencia. Más recientemente, otro ruso que se llamaba Leontiev decía los niños crecen y tienen una actividad y en esa actividad relacionada con el mundo es como aprenden. Pero fijaros, el aprendizaje servicio plantea que sea una acción reflexiva. En tercero, estudian los tejidos. Y uno de los tejidos es la sangre. Y tú lo vas a entender mucho mejor, porque tú estás en un proceso de hacer una actividad que va a tener un impacto en la sociedad. Un maratón de donación de sangre. La profesora de matemáticas va a trabajar también la parte, por ejemplo, de estadística. Vais a poder hacer una gráfica donde se vea cuántos donantes hay en tu localidad, cuántos son hombres, cuántos son mujeres, qué meses se dona más. Y vas a entender muchísimo mejor la estadística. Pero es que a lo mejor el profesor de valores va a trabajar también en la asignatura de valores o en religión sobre temas como qué sentido tiene la donación. Eso es un proyecto de aprendizaje-servicio. Es vincular lo que yo hago en el cole con la acción para mejorar una situación. Y nosotros entender cuando estudiamos que lo que estamos trabajando tiene una utilidad práctica. Pero no porque nos lo diga el profe, sino porque nosotros vamos a impactar sobre ese ambiente y vamos a hacer algo. De modo que tiene un elemento motivacional que te da más ganas de incorporarte. Porque el aprendizaje-servicio es un aprendizaje centrado en el alumnado. Y gente que en clase, fuera de esos proyectos, no tiene ningún interés, se engancha y se motiva. Los aprendizajes se hacen vivos, se hacen funcionales, sirven para algo. Salen del libro, salen de la pantalla del ordenador y cobran sentido. Hay un señor que se llama Jacques Delors que escribió un informe para la UNESCO que se llama La educación esconde un tesoro. Y dice, hay que aprender a conocer. Tenemos que conocer, tenemos que saber los conocimientos, las cosas que utilizamos en las clases. Tenemos que aprender a hacer cosas. Tenemos que aprender a convivir y tenemos que aprender a ser. Aprender a ser me refiero a aprender a ser autónomo, aprender a ser responsable con un compromiso que adquieres con un servicio, con una entidad. Vas a aprender a convivir porque vas a trabajar en equipo, porque vas a resolver conflictos, problemas que surgen en la acción que vas a llevar. Si no hay acción, no tienes esa oportunidad y vas a aprender a hacer, en el sentido de que puedes demostrar que has aprendido algo. ¿Y cuáles son los resultados? Hay muchas investigaciones. Nuestra experiencia nos dice que aprenden mejor, que podemos hacer que más gente aprenda y que podemos hacer que aprendan muchas más cosas.
The question number 6 is the question of democratic coexistence. All these schools try to resolve conflicts democratically and through dialogue. In fact, in many of the schools, this is what has allowed them to go further and consider a different way of organizing teaching. In the case of a high school in Madrid, the staff, the teachers decided to tackle its coexistent problems by involving its pupils in such a way that they themselves, 5 from each class, became mediators. They are perceived as people of reference for anyone who has problems, among others of integration or bullying. Every student knows that they are not alone in this school and that there are several people who had volunteered to listen to them and try to solve their problems. Usually, a simple conversation between the parties concerned resolves conflicts without the need for a formal committee meeting. In primary schools, assemblies are the privileged setting for conflict resolution. In addition to the classroom assemblies, these schools can have a monthly or bi-weekly meeting of the delegates from each of the primary classrooms. In total, a little more than 20 children talk about the school's global problems. The topics discussed usually concern apparently tangential aspects of the school life, conflicts, distribution of playground equipment, canteen, but also various celebrations, for example, Water Day, proposals for family life, for example, No Television Day.
When it comes to student misbehavior, many schools across the country have zero-tolerance policies, which often lead to suspensions. These policies disproportionately affect students of color. But now, some school districts, including those in San Francisco, Denver, and New York City, have turned away from zero tolerance and replaced it with what is known as restorative justice. In these programs, students are encouraged to resolve conflict by talking about the root causes of their behavior. NewsHour Weekend visited a New York high school campus taking part in a 4-year-long study of restorative justice practices. Megan Thompson has the story.
Let's do a quick check-in. Just give me a one word about how your week has been.
In a 9th grade civics class in Brooklyn, New York, Erica Wright is encouraging students to talk to each other and build trust. It's part of a new program known as Restorative Justice.
All the kids have been asking for trips.
A team from the nonprofit Center for Court Innovation works at the high schools on Canarsie Educational Campus, where the majority of the students qualify for free or reduced price lunch. The campus is in an area that has traditionally had one of the highest suspension rates in the city.
Our students have incredibly adult-sized problems, but don't always have adult-sized resources.
Mishkael Setut is a restorative justice coordinator.
What restorative justice allows us to do is to look beyond the behavior and look at some of the root causes and see how can we prevent this from turning into something much bigger. So now if a student gets into a fight, the question isn't how bad was the fight and how many days is that suspension worth? The question is, well, what do we do to make sure that you don't have another fight?
The last time that we met, you guys had a conflict with each other.
Just into its first year, the project is part of a citywide effort to reduce suspensions and increase safety.
So just what's been going on? How was your week?
This is called a harm circle, where Erica Wright mediates conflicts between students.
My week has been kind of calm.
Passing a baton, known as the talking piece, junior Tony Deary and freshman Shane Dover are discussing what happened after school one day in February.
I was walking on Rockaway Parkway, and he hit me, and we got into an altercation.
Came up to him and tried to discuss with him, but I didn't take it the way I was supposed to. I actually put matters in my own hands. And then I ended up fighting him.
We have the time to where we can actually facilitate a real conversation, and it's not like, okay, we just don't want you guys to fight, but it's like, what was the root of the fight? How have you guys been since that time?
The way I handle my stuff is, usually I handle it with violence, but ever since I've encountered the mediation circle, I've learned how to control my anger and just talk about it, because talking doesn't hurt. It's better to use your words than to use violence.
The circle helped the students realize the root cause of the conflict was simply a misunderstanding.
We really had a lot of similarities. We had we both played football. like the same football players.
Ever since it's been resolved, like I've been seeing Shane around. I've been treating him like he like one of my bros, like I know him all my life.
We hang out sometimes in the park, and if the conflict wasn't resolved, then I think it would still be an ongoing problem.
Change doesn't happen overnight.
Candace Fagan is a dean at Urban Action Academy, the Canarsie campus school that Shane Dover attends. She's noticed a measurable difference not only with him, but with many of her students since the program started this school year.
I see a lot more respect in the building. It's just not a feeling. I see the levels of respect that students have for one another.
Think about like your best friend, and what is one trait that they possess that you value the most about them?
Ninth graders in this civics class are discussing qualities they value most in relationships.
Because you can cry and you can laugh with your best friend.
With that happening in the classroom, it's less likely for you to fight somebody that you've now built a relationship with, and authentic relationships, not just, hey, how you doing? My name is, my favorite color is blue. We go in depth, we go in with feelings and how do we handle conflict and anger.
Ann Fagan says the program has contributed to a significant drop in the number of suspensions at Urban Action Academy.
Last year this time, we were at 158 suspensions. This year, we're at 37. Now, although, we did have 37 incidences this year, how do we repair the harm that's done? How do we let both students know that they're valuable assets to the community? And we want to bring them back into the community so that they can continue to be successful academically.
Multiple academic studies have found that suspensions make it more likely that students will drop out of high school. The trend particularly affects students of color. The U.S. Department of Education has found that nationwide, black students are 3 times more likely to be suspended than white students. And a 2011 study of nearly 1 million students in Texas found that those students who were suspended or expelled were nearly 3 times more likely to come into contact with the juvenile justice system within the next year. Coordinator Mishkael Setut argues that the restorative justice model can help prevent kids from ending up in prison down the road, not just in his school, but across the nation.
We have the largest incarcerated population in the world, and that is not going to change unless we start doing things differently. I think restorative justice is needed everywhere. But specifically at Canarsie, you cannot necessarily provide everything that a kid needs. But what restorative justice does is it gives you the option of not doing more harm.
In December, Setut helped mediate a circle with Jacob Merritt, a senior who fought with and injured another student 2 years ago when he was a sophomore.
She used to make fun of my hair, she used to call me names, and usually I would deal with it, but it was one day, I couldn't really put up with it anymore. I was fed up.
Merritt and the other student fought, and she ended up going to the hospital. Police officers came to the school and arrested Merritt.
I was nervous, I was scared, I didn't know what was gonna happen, I didn't know if I was gonna spend the night in the precinct. I'd never been in that situation before, so it was scary for me.
But ultimately, the other student, who did not agree to our interview request, dropped the charges. Administrators suspended Merritt for a week. This all occurred before the school had started harm circles. The tension between the two students bubbled up again on a school trip last year.
So she had got upset.
Merritt's girlfriend, Harmony Colazzo, had a verbal confrontation with the other student.
So we ended up getting separated on the bus.
Then Colazzo, Merritt, and the student agreed to talk in a circle with Mishkael Setut.
It provided a safe environment for me to talk to her and her to talk to me without there being, a big argument. I was able to put my side of the story, which she wasn't able to hear.
Jacob Merritt also had a chance to apologize.
They get arrested and suspended, but they actually never get to say, I'm sorry. And so for Jacob, he got that opportunity. And for the other young lady, that's what she really wanted to hear.
I always felt like any day she could say something or I would say something and, a bomb would go off. But since the mediation, I felt like things have been, diffused.
Have a good weekend, everybody. Bye, Tyrese.
Before I finish, I must point out that some schools claim to be democratic schools. For instance, Summerhill, Montessori, Waldorf, and so on. But for me, the main problem with these schools is that they are private. So there are quite a strong barrier to those that don't have money enough to enroll their kids in these schools. But the question for me is also whether they are really democratic or not. You have a video, a 10 minutes video, in which some doubts are cast about the Waldorf schools.
Newsnight has learned that parents complained to the Department for Education about racism and bullying at Steiner schools, those schools favoured by less conventional middle-class families. So why has the government provided public funds for new Steiner free schools?
Newsnight has exclusively seen 2 Department for Education memos which relate serious concerns about Steiner schools. Memos that the British Humanist Association had to go to court to get released.
Steiner schools, they've been popular for decades among the more liberal and bohemian, some might say wacky middle classes. Sandra Bullock, Robin Van Persie, both former students. But Newsnight has learned that complaints were made to the Department for Education that in some of these privately funded schools, teachers had said they thought bullying was part of how kids worked out their karma. And in one school, there were problems with racism linked directly to the Steiner philosophy. But since the government received these complaints, it agreed to fund 3 new Steiner free schools. Chris Cook has the story.
I think the Steiner pedagogy is a really interesting philosophy for many reasons, not least the fact that it centres on the child and the child's education holistically. They focus on the human being and they nurture and they are affectionate, and I think that that's really important to build the human being before you build an academic or a worker.
Steiner schools, sometimes called Waldorf or Steiner-Waldorf schools, have a bit of a following.
1, 2.
There are now about 30 private Steiner schools, and since 2008, 3 state ones. Another is on the way. But Newsnight has exclusively seen 2 Department for Education memos which relate serious concerns about Steiner schools. Memos that the British Humanist Association had to go to court to get released. The memos from 2010 come from the early days of the Free Schools programme and note that the civil service had received material indicating that the Steiner curriculum is structured around the spiritual philosophy of Rudolf Steiner, called anthroposophy. Rudolf Steiner was an Austrian-born occultist who died in 1925, but his ideas, anthroposophy, live on. It's a spiritual doctrine that covers everything from homeopathy and biodynamic farming to the purpose of life. This grand work still fills bookshops and includes some rather particular ideas about race and reincarnation, specifically that people with darker skin are less evolved, but if they do well, if they have good karma, they can hope to be reincarnated in later lives as a higher ranked race. White Aryans, of course, are at the top. They evolved from advanced colonists from the lost continent of Atlantis. The controversy around Steiner schools relates to just how many of his less palatable ideas make their way into the classroom. The real question is, just how much Rudolf is there in the Steiner schools?
The idea that we have incarnated through the races is a very controversial idea that is not part of our modern thinking in Steiner schools at all. In fact, I would find it quite outrageous and unacceptable. And it is not a basis upon which one would want to found any criticism of Steiner schools today, because it just does not exist. It is not what we believe.
But some of those ideas have occasionally cropped up within the private Steiner schools very recently, and some parents are worried about speaking out.
There was diversity training at the school, and part of it was ticking boxes of which ethnicity you were. And 4 of the teachers ticked all the boxes, and the trainer asked why on earth they'd done that. And they said because they'd been all those races. And all those teachers were white, so obviously they see themselves as the pinnacle.
The Department for Education memos also reveal some important concerns about bullying. For example, it said that in 8 of the 25 private Steiner schools, there had been serious complaints about staff bullying pupils. There were also concerns about policies on stamping out bullying and worries that this might be related to Rudolf Steiner's teachings. The memos report a complaint that one parent witnessed a physical attack on their son where a teacher failed to intervene, and the teacher subsequently justified this approach by claiming that the children were working out their karma. But that's certainly not the approach everywhere.
There was an incident where my child was attacked in class and it was terribly traumatic for everybody involved. The school, however, were incredible at dealing with it. The teacher in the classroom, the assistant, were both very nurturing, very caring, and my daughter has flourished and grown after the event. The school management team pounced on the problem very, very quickly.
Since the memos are written, 3 new state Steiner schools have been opened or approved to open. That's not uncontroversial given the nature of Steiner's work. The DFE memos note that it obviously wouldn't approve anything where racism or bullying were issues. Tonight, it added that it can and it would close schools, even private ones, where they were. But that doesn't close the question of whether this Austrian mystic's ideas are actually worth public money.
Here to discuss Steiner schools are Francis Russell, whose child was a pupil at Greenwich Steiner School, and Andrew Copson, the Chief Executive of the British Humanist Association. Andrew, if I could start with you. I mean, the evidence seems to suggest that kids learn at these schools and that they're pretty happy. Why on earth are you making such a fuss about them?
Well, the reason that we tried to get the documents that the DFE has finally had to release is precisely because we feared what they turned out to actually contain. 8 out of 25 of the independent Steiner schools that exist had serious cases of bullying of pupils by staff, which is a completely massive proportion compared with other schools. There was a culture of secrecy encouraged in teacher training materials within Steiner teacher training schemes that said that they should prevent other people from seeing their lesson plans, make sure that lesson plans were lost, and that was obviously because of the controversial nature of the material. The quasi-religious, pseudo-scientific, mystical belief system that is anthroposophy and Rudolf Steiner's work was linked directly to incidents of racism and bullying within those schools as well. So that's why we're concerned. We're concerned if any sort of ideological belief system takes the place of real education in state schools.
Francis, the evidence that in some schools bullying was not just tolerated, but in some senses thought of as a good thing, as a way of identifying, you know, what kind of kids or what kind of person these kids would grow up to be. Doesn't that immensely worry you as somebody who has, as a parent of a kid at one of these schools?
OK, this is total rubbish, what you're talking about now. I am a parent who had a child at the school, but I've also been involved in setting up and running this particular school over the last 6 years, and been involved with it for 10 and been involved in the movement. The allegations that were raised in those reports were never tested. This was just some parents who had written to the Department for Education, and they were being raised in the reports as issues of how do we manage if parents come up and say these kind of things with the media. There's absolutely no proof at all about these things. I'm sorry, can I just continue for a moment? What you're describing does not happen in Steiner schools. That would never happen in our school. It would never happen in any of the schools that I know anything about.
But why does the handbook talk about kids being, either victims or bullies and you needing to sort of test which category they go into? Why do these handbooks say these things?
I'm not clear about this handbook at all. What I can tell you is what our policy says and what policies in all the schools say. Remember that they are all inspected and they all have to abide by the independent schools rules. And what they say is that bullying is not tolerated, but within Steiner schools, within many schools, we try to get children to learn to deal with conflict that is going on, but they are not left to do that on their own. That is done with guidance of the adults, with teachers and parents involved. I'm sorry, but all this stuff about the pseudo-spiritualism and everything, that is all to do with Steiner's views on anthroposophy, which are not taught in schools. It is there for some adults to use as a way of guiding their lives, if they choose to do so. just does not form any part of a modern Steiner school.
But nonetheless, he is the driving force intellectually behind it. And, you know, in his philosophy, there is this stuff which I think most people would think of as racist and bonkers about the Aryans being the super race and all the rest of it.
Absolutely, of course it's racist.
But don't you worry about being associated with a school founded on such ideas?
Rudolf Steiner had a lot of good ideas about educational provision, which have been taken and developed and progressed, and that is what forms a part of the education
is there any role
today.
for public money in schools which are based on this kind of philosophy, Andrew?
Well, I obviously don't think so. I think because any state-funded school should be built on proper educational practice and theory, and Steiner education theory isn't. And your attempt to dismiss... No, can I just say something? Because you've spoken for a long time about made claims about what was in these documents which are untrue. An attempt to dismiss these documents as if they contain just the allegations of individual parents will completely fail, because they actually quote teacher training manuals for Steiner pedagogy, which say many of the things that has just been said, both in the report and now, about some children being destined by their karma to be victims and some to be bullied.
Do you think public money should go into these schools?
Evidence.
Because you presumably paid, did you?
I had to pay, but there are many parents who cannot afford to pay, who would like the kind of education that you get in Steiner schools, which is about really educating the whole child in a very imaginative and artistic way. And if you look at the school inspection reports, they are telling parents how good these schools are and how good they are at producing young people with strong self-esteem, academically able and well prepared to go on and be good citizens in life.
I'm afraid we are going to have to leave it there. But anyway, thank you very much. I thought that was a jolly interesting discussion.
And to conclude some questions, first of all, are really democratic schools better than conventional ones? Well, we lack big data about that. We don't have statistical data showing that those students, those pupils attending democratic schools are doing better than students attending, let's say, conventional schools. We need data or more data than visiting individual schools in order to be able to present before the public opinion and before the politicians that this kind of organizing schools is better for our future. One question could be, if democratic schools are so good, why don't we have much more democratic schools? Well, maybe this is sometimes a little bit tricky to explain, but obviously there is a big inertia from the past, and we have talked a lot across the course about the difficulties for change. Teachers themselves, the parents maybe don't like radical changes in the school system. Maybe the teachers at the beginning of their careers are willing to propose radical changes, but with the passing of time, probably they curb their enthusiasm. So this is the end of my presentation about this kind of schools.